everybody. Welcome to the training, learning, and development community. Happy Friday to all of you. Hey, Gina, Rubina, Thomas, thanks for coming in today. We are starting a whole new series here on LMSs. We're having some LMS conversations. And first of all, I just want to thank Rubina, who's in the audience right now, for bringing up this topic and wanting to us to talk a little bit more about LMSs, different types of LMSs, how people use them. I think that's a conversation that probably isn't out there enough. And even when I was doing the research for this particular sort of series, I was like, wow, there is a ton of stuff to know about LMSs out there. Most of them are kind of like paid sort of blog posts and paid research about how great particular LMSs are, but I could, it was actually hard to find real conversations about people that are actually using, a learning management system. And so today I'm actually honored to have our first guest who's going to open up this series talking about being an LMS admin. And I'm excited because he's one of the more interesting people I've met over the last few years. I'm going to give you a quick rundown. TLDC 19 last year, which might as well be like 100 years ago. But last year when we did TLDC 19 in Phoenix, my guest, Quetzal, should I say your whole name? Quetzalcoatl Cortes?
Well, I want to hear how you say it.
I always call you just Quetzal. But is it Quetzalcoatl Cortes? Is that right?
Yeah, it's close enough.
Close enough. He showed up to the event because he was volunteering at TLDC 19. And my video guy, who has done my events for years and years, had a kidney stone. And so he had to cancel at the last minute. But Quetzal showed up and he had like the most incredible camera gear and ended up filming the better parts of the TLDC 19 video recordings. If you remember and you can access those recordings, you'll see them. All the really incredible ones are the ones that he did. So he's an amazing videographer. And I can't remember the name of the equipment that you have, but it was really so impressive how you pulled everything together and actually did that for us. At first I thought you were going to be working the registration desk, but
Renaissance man.
Oh, what's that?
Sorry for interrupting you. Go for it.
Anyway, so I can say, I can safely say that you are amazing at what you did at the event. And just knowing you over the last year or so, just as much as you know about instructional design and your experience, it's great to have you in this broadcast, and I'm really excited about being able to talk to you about this stuff. So let's just start out with your background. I vaguely remember it, but why don't you tell everybody, how did you start out how did you become an instructional designer?
Anyway, well, thanks for having me on there, Luis. I saw Rubina kind of pop out before we get started here, how they were using Q. I use Q as a nickname, by the way, and depending on how you reference it, gives me an idea of who you are, because some people will go with Star Trek reference, some will go with a James Bond reference, some will go with, I think they're even like a cartoon. I've even got one where it's a Korean, I think it's like a J-pop. Is J-pop or Korean? Is a K-pop one where it was my sushi guy from San Francisco. He remembers I think it was a K-pop kind of music video called "Hey Mr. Q," and so he'd always refer to me as Mr. Q.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to dig that one up.
Yeah. Anyway, so I got into this through my master program. So I had finished college, and I finished college, I want to say about 06 or so. No, actually, I'm sorry. My first tour was about 03, 04, and didn't know what to do with my life. So I went right back into college, went and got a master's degree. And from there, it was a little bit easier to find a job. I happened to luck into a job with Cisco when I was around 2008, and just doing basic e-learning development. I mean, they didn't need to know that I had a non-existent sort of history. I had the basic stint with a startup with a guy I finished my master's degree with. Sam Rogers here knows our mutual friend Lee Rodriguez. We had a company together, but the instructional design work wasn't very much in that space. So I really kind of cut my teeth when I started up with Cisco there, and I just started as a basic e-learning developer. They just want to know if I use Captivate, and I had on the trial version that I was just messing around with, and they were just desperate for people. So back in those days, they were just hiring people. Like if you were really cheap and you could do this sort of work that we tell you to do, we're going to hire you. So that's how I ended up getting into it. And through that, I ended up getting a whole bunch of other opportunities. The one in particular that we're talking about is how I stumbled into becoming an LMS admin through that. And it was just out of a necessity they had.
Yeah. Yeah. You went to San Francisco State, or was that? Okay. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I went to San Francisco State. See, I went in, I want to say 96. Yeah. About 96 is about right. Yeah.
All
Late
right.
96.
And you did like a stint at eBay. Was that right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
You were there for a while.
Yeah. I did a tour over at eBay for a while. That was the last time I was in California. I spent a few years kind of working with them, and then I moved on to Arizona, and now I work for a financial a company that specializes in personal advising, financial advising sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems like you kind of did you did your time in Silicon Valley as an instructional designer, which I don't run into that a whole bunch. A lot of folks from the Bay Area really. It's for some reason it seems rare in the TLDC world. And yeah. So anyway, let's start talking about LMSs.
Sure.
So so we're talking about learning management systems. And for me, I remember when I was first getting into the world of e-learning, I understood what like a content management system was, but I had no clue like what a learning management system was. Can you give us the lowdown on what you think it is?
Yeah. The way I look at a learning management system is a learning management system is supposed to take a lot of the data that you have available, and the courses that you have available, and put them in this thing that can be tracked. You can have an interface that your users can access, and basically it's a portal where you could store your stuff, you can get reporting, and you can I'm trying to think what's the third item. Oh, you could do it in mediums such as e-learning and like instructor-led training, webinars and so forth.
So as an LMS admin, what's that look like for you?
For me, it revolves around what's being asked for by the business. So usually the business will drive what sort of training needs that are there. Sometimes I'm involved with it as an instructional designer. Like I'm the one that's creating the content, and therefore I'm also the LMS admin. So I'm responsible for building whatever sort of content that's there, putting it into the LMS myself, and tracking it based off of whatever the business needs, whatever sort of reporting is available to me, and so forth, and being able to provide all of those elements. And then, of course, making it visible to those that need to have it. Is this something that's company-wide? Is it something that only affects a specific group of people because the content is just cater to those particular people? I need to make sure that the system can be able to do that in a way where people are able to do whatever they need and then troubleshoot stuff, like very simple things like I took the course, but it's not showing me as complete. So whoever's the LMS admin has to go in there, kind of troubleshoot what it's going on. Is it something that's user error, or is it just something that maybe the course didn't have a right trigger, the correct trigger or something for whatever sort of browser they had, and you have to manually mark them.
Interesting. So are you creating the courses within the LMS? Is the LMS, does it provide like an authoring tool, or is that something external?
And it's a really good point. I think we should talk about some of the distinctions. So a lot of the distinctions we talk about are LMS, LCMS, and LRS. So as we had talked about with LMS, it tracks, delivers, and keeps an eye on whatever the user needs. An LCMS, which sounds closer to what you're talking about, can track training, kind of limited to what an LMS can do. It typically doesn't track instructor-led training like an LMS, though I suppose there's a few that do. But it does help you design content that lives within the system and deliver that content. You develop content within the system, similar to like what you would with e-learning tools. When I first started out at Cisco, we had an LCMS, and I don't remember what the brand was. They just referred to it as an LCMS, but we never really used it, at least on our team, the way that it probably would have been designed. So we had used it specifically for its tracking of completion. Like basically they just wanted clicks. And then they also wanted, they wanted to track their smile sheet. So you could put the smile sheets in it. But I do recall that you can use the LCMS to bundle a lot of content and reuse it into other areas. So people would build out presentations and they would have it in there. And, you know, you can have audio, you can have other sorts of elements, and you can bundle those and put them into, you can create like whole new content based off of the content that's already there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's a learning record store, which is similar to an LMS. It tracks training delivery methods, but it can interpret kind of like beyond its system. Now, I'm not familiar with a learning record store nearly as much. A lot of the jobs that I've had, and even my current one, doesn't involve a learning record store. I know there was at least one gentleman here who's in the audience who has experience kind of integrating with the learning record store as it relates to an LMS. But from my understanding of it, you know, it uses things like XAPI to view things such as like a browser that a person's using. You know, it can view their browser history and associate it with the learner's transcript. You know, it can work in concert with an LMS or an LCMS, and you know, using that LRS to connect the multiple LCMSs, or I'm sorry, LMS. So if it was like a very large company that had multiple LMSs, depending on, you know, it's like a global one, there might be like a North America one, there might be an APAC one, there might be one in Europe or so forth. And they would use a learning record store to kind of like tie all the data together into one area. So that's my understanding of how those three kind of like the distinctions between those three.
Right. No, thanks for that. And I saw that you had posted that video.
So that video, I had found that video. And, you know, I love that the person who had done that. I mean, I want to say with my whole heart that they were kind of being a bit tongue-in-cheek with their acting and with their animation, but I feel that they were being very serious about it. And I wanted to just put that because, you know, I've run into a couple training opportunities. Like I live here in Arizona, and the water is very hard. And we needed to get a water softener. My wife asked me, said, well, what does a water softener do? Well, let's use YouTube. And we found this most ridiculous video. It was horrible. It had horrible sound effects. It had horrible sort of animation. Not to say that this one is, because I couldn't do the one that's in this one, but it's just how it was implemented. But the funny thing is that I would not have remembered, you know, that video had it not been for the, I don't know if absurdity is the right word, but definitely sort of kind of like interesting uses of visuals. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I think it's a TLDC Twitter account. They retweeted the video that's there. It only has like a few views, so it looks like whoever created it, they just posted it probably for their own portfolio sort of thing. It looks like they worked at Dell, but it's very interesting how they used acting and a green screen and then this giant owl to explain the difference between a learning management system and a LCMS. And, you know, I think to their credit, they did do the job. Like I was able to process it using their metaphors, but it was the execution that it just put a smile on my face. And just like, wow, I hope I don't have a few to drink and then watch this again. I might be scared by an owl that hits you in the front of the main screen and doesn't blink.
That's funny. So it's on, I retweeted on the TLD Cast Twitter account. So check it out, you guys, if you can.
I mean, yeah, the content's useful, but it's a little bit funny.
So, I mean, it sounds like you need to have technical skills to be an LMS admin.
Well, here's what I mean. When we think of technical skills, to do your job, depending on who you're working for, like, you know, I'm sure you want to have some basic coding if you are trying to configure it and using some CSS sort of skins that are there. You know, you probably want to have an understanding of how it works if you're going to integrate it with the learning record store so you could troubleshoot some sort of things. But if you're just trying to use it kind of as is, just using the user interface, I'm pretty sure you could kind of get by with just having an understanding of it, having an understanding of it, an understanding of what the learner needs, what the business needs, and then how whatever sort of authoring tools you plan on using kind of talk to it. And that's a really good point. There are people who use Storyline and they're just like, oh, well, will this integrate? A big thing is kind of like how it integrates. What are you trying to track? And some LMSs, I remember some LMSs I've worked in that didn't like Scorum 2004. And this was like in, I want to say it's like 2008 or 2010 or so. It only liked the older version of that because it was just very simple. Like they just never got around to updating their system. So you have to have an understanding. It's like, okay, can my e-learning tool even talk to this? Like, can it go down, dumb down its Scorum packaging so that way it will work with the learning management system? Or conversely, you know, your learning management system has Tin Can. You want to use Tin Can? Great. Do I have any sort of tools that will allow it to talk to that? And you just have to have an understanding of it, whether you're developing it or you're working with other developers that are connecting with it. Because sometimes there are people who are brought on and they're just told build this sort of content, but they really haven't had that sort of experience with the tool itself and how it engages, because they're doing their job. They're busy kind of building it, working with subject matter experts, developing the content there. But they want to be able to know that what they put in works. And sometimes they have an idea, it works on their computer, but how does it play when it runs through that LMS and a user actually sees it on their end? They might not have that level of experience with it. And yes, you can create dummy accounts, but like in the case of the job that I'm with now, they use Okta. I don't know if anyone's familiar with one like Okta. It's basically like it's kind of like a one-stop shop for handshaking through single sign-on for a lot of different applications. It's single sign. You go into that one place, and from there you can go into like Salesforce. You can go into SharePoint. You can go into our learning management tool, and you need an actual like corporate email in order to access that, in order to get to the learning management system. So sometimes you need like an actual person, or you need to log in. Like you need to have the capability that's built into the tool to log in as that person in order for you to kind of see from their lens. Because sometimes you're like, oh, well, it's working for me. And anyone who says that, I say, well, great. Why don't you ship them your computer?
Right.
Because you want to be able to help people with these sorts of things. And sometimes just because of the fact that you're a super admin kind of impacts your view. So having those sorts of understandings, having a good worldview of these sorts of things will really make you a better one. So I would take that over, like, as you had referred to, like technical, like really sort of coding sort of skills, if you will, I think is what, if you're referring to that in terms of being technical.
Kind of, you know, and I guess like, so when you were studying to be an instructional designer, I mean, how much of that prepared you for working with LMSs, or did they at all? Zero.
None. Zero. All right. So to give context, and you know, I feel okay. It's been years and I've talked about this. I started at Cisco about 2008, and what we would do is we would just develop content in Captivate. We'd wrap it in like Scorum 1.2, and then we would give it to our LMS person. It was also the person who did all our voiceovers, because you had a choice of either Captivate Robo Voice, which is horrible, or this woman who had a wonderful British accent, but she lived in Australia and we're in California. So you have a completely different time zone there. So you had to work with her schedule, and she would not only load it up, but they have, I don't even know if they still have it. They have something called Colt, which is the Cisco online testing, I believe. And you had to give her a spreadsheet. She would populate everything in there. You know, she would create your smile sheet and everything would work. Well, my managers kind of got tired of having to wait for Australian time to kind of make sure that courses got up and whatnot. So I was trained to say, okay, well, we're going to get you up to speed so you could load courses for people on our side. I remember talking to her, and she had said that you have to take a test in order to get permissions to use this LCMS. And the test it was like an authorization sort of thing. It had nothing to do with how you did the day-to-day operation. I think it was like, I don't know if it was policy based or something, but she had recalled that the way you had to beat it was to just brute force it. And she was going to help me brute force the test. So you essentially got like so many sort of fails, but you knew that there were a finite amount of test questions. And if you identified the ones that you had got wrong, if you pass about 3 or 4 times, you would get in, and then you would get this LMS privilege. So it was
nuts. Yeah.
I got in, and through that, I learned things that they didn't even think about. So we had to put in test questions. And up until that point, everyone was just putting in text. And I was asking, like, it would be really helpful if people can see pictures related to the course that they're taking in order to associate with the question, because you want to give people visuals that are identifiable to when they actually are using the actual tool that they're based on. And I remember her being like, I don't even know if it'll accept pictures. And sure enough, it did. And no one never bothered to ask. No one bothered to ask. No one bothered to check it's what it can handle in terms of that. And so a lot of my experience came from constantly thinking about what the learner needs based off of the limitations that I had, and just asking questions like, can it do this? Okay, it can. We've never tried that. Well, let's just keep trying it and just see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and Thomas in chat is saying, I feel like this is a big area of development for the ID industry. Our work is so often delivered through a platform we know little or nothing about. Great course on a bad LMS kind of negates all our hard work. Yeah, and it seems like that's everybody, like a lot of folks in chat are giving that the thumbs up, and that's, I've seen the same sort of thing like through the years. Let me ask you this. Are you, do you consider yourself technical at all?
I would consider myself resourceful.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. Like, I look at myself as like over the years, I look at myself less of an instructional designer because of how corporations have used me over the years, and more like a problem solver, more like a Swiss Army knife. Like, I mean, it's an unfortunate fact, and I want to make sure people understand this. Like, I am not a great instructional designer. I'm probably not even a good instructional designer, but I'm good enough. And I will stand by that, which means that depending on what the business is asking for, what they're trying to achieve, I'm good enough to help them kind of figure out what they can do within the limitations, because a lot of this, you have to understand, is based off of limitations either by the technology, limitations by the short-mindedness of the business, limitations on what you're given as far as budget, limitations on what you're given as far as time. So a lot of those factors really kind of like hit the end result. And I've heard people like talk about their resume of their portfolio work. And I always go to like, when I look at a portfolio of work, I don't look at it as people's best work. I look at it as people's best work given the circumstances that they were in that particular moment. And so a good ID will be able to explain how this came about given the constraints that they had. And they can easily point out where it had fell short. And I can do that with anything that I have. And I want to make sure that people understand that I'm not here to kind of give you the pie in the sky version of instructional design. That's not my take. Any sort of things you've seen me post on Twitter relative to instructional design, that's not my take. Usually I follow the money because that's just how it works for me. And that's how I am as a person. I know a lot of people here online, they are really all about giving the best possible learner experience and energy, and they have the resources and the time and so forth to do that. And for you guys, I applaud you. But in my space, like, a problem needs to be solved, and it needs to be solved, and you only have an hour. I'm going to give you something in an hour. You give me a little bit more time than that, I'm going to give you something better. You give me a little bit more time than that, I'm going to give you something great. So, that's the context that I operate in.
No, and I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's it's always so interesting talking to you. You always like just bring these insights in that are so honest and really sort of telling, and the perspective is just a little different than the typical. So I really appreciate that. How about the collaborative piece? How much of that do you have to do on a regular basis? When I was researching all this, it just felt like collaboration was a huge part of being an LMS admin. Is that something that you find true?
There's a ton of at least verify that you want to do as an LMS admin. I mean, you would do that with a lot of things when you're developing your courses. You want to have, you want to verify with your subject matter experts. Is this accurate? Is this something that we want to have here? Are these design elements going to work with your audience and so forth? As an LMS admin, you want to verify, how are you going to track some reporting? What sort of reporting can people even get? Is this something that is mandatory for everyone or even for a select group? I usually have a list that I keep, and lists are probably one of the more important things, not just in learning management, but in other facets, because people ask a lot of the same sort of things, and you can remember them. If you've done this job for a while, a lot of these things you have an understanding of it. It's like playing the violin. You just kind of like have a feel for it, but after a while you kind of miss a few things. So it's good to kind of have a list and kind of remind yourself, okay, when somebody is just bringing a course and kind of putting it in, how do they, what are their expectations? What are their expectations? What's the learner's sports expectations here? What are you supposed to communicate with the people who are designing the course, who are separate from those people, and how they were expecting it to talk to the system? And is it operating in the same space? Is it putting it inside a little light box, which all of a sudden their cute little play bar on the side is not operating in? Is it operating in a separate window, sort of thing? Like, these are some of the questions that we want to have between all parties that are involved with this, and in order to give the best experience possible.
Right. Excellent. You up for some questions from Rubina? She's got 5 in here that I'd love to throw at you if you're up for it.
Should probably bring her on and just have her tell me directly.
No,
it was her idea from the beginning, by the way.
You
need to give credit where credit's due.
Idea from the beginning. What I want to do is like get through these questions, and then I want to get into some more specifics about what you do and specifically the platform you're using, because I definitely want to get into that. And I was hoping that we can get out of this in like 30 minutes, but that's going to be impossible. So, okay. First question from Rubina. Do you need to know HTML and Java or any other programming?
When I apply coding and whatnot, my answer to this is similar to one we had talked about regarding coding and instructional design. You need to know as much as the tool allows and about as little as the project that you're working in necessitates. So in my case, the tool involves like CSS coding. It involves some not HTML, but you want to know how to create URLs for deep links, because sometimes their deep links may not work in the specific way. So in my case, I've had like horrible experiences with trying to get a URL to work properly that I could just hand off to somebody and that can go into a communication. It fires up every single time. Usually it's having some understanding of how that works. But if your LMS is kind of operated in a way where you could do those day-to-days and not do it, then that's also the answer. So that's why I say it's whatever the tool has, it's good to know what it can handle, because there may be a situation where it becomes applicable for you to know it. But if your job does not require that or that much, then that's about as much as you need to know.
How often are you kind of Googling for code? Do you find yourself in there, or do you just do it from?
Not as often as you would think. I mean, if, for example, I got one, this LMS that I'm currently working in, they put in a new button called subscriptions on the top. Does nothing for me because it is for a specific company that operates using subscriptions, but they decided to put it across the board. On mine, you press a button and it just turns the screen kind of gray, like it's about to lightbox something, but it shows nothing. So it's a useless feature on our end. And their answer to me is, until we can kind of figure out a button, here's some CSS scripting. There's a function inside on the back end that allows you to paste it in, and then that should change that. So changing like if you want like search bars to appear or not, they give you that level of coding. So that's the most that I've been exposed to as of recent.
Right. Okay, cool. So this Sam Rogers, display none. Yeah. Um, so Rubina's asking this one. I think we talked about it a little bit. Should an ID be an LMS administrator? What are overlapping skills and knowledge domains?
Should they be? Well, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question there because, should they? Everything that you do, you could find some facet of it that can apply to whatever job you're particular in. I'm pretty sure I'm drawing on elements of when I was a substitute teacher relative to instructional design. And like, I really wasn't doing anything but just glorifying babysitting. If you'd ever seen me substitute teach, which obviously no one here on the call has. That being said, it's good in my experience if you want to communicate better with an LMS administrator to kind of have an understanding of how they talk to it. And you really don't get a good understanding unless you've actually played with the tool itself. And even if you are an LMS administrator, a lot of LMSs are kind of different depending on where you work for. So for example, I had worked, maybe 3 different LMSs before I came to the current company that I'm at. And within a month, they wanted to evaluate it because they were going to take it. It was just an LMS just for a specific group of people into company wide. And they wanted to do some pros and cons against it. Well, I'd never really used it. I hadn't really like stress tested it. So I think when I look at it, I think it was like, hey, it looks better than the other one, I think, is our analysis. It uses this tool called virtual coaching, and it has some Zoom integration, which the other tool didn't have. And looking back on that now, it's like, we don't even use that virtual coach integration. The Zoom integration we don't use. I mean, we use Zoom with it, but not in the way that this tool was built. And yeah, it's prettier, but the day-to-day stuff that I run into, like, for me as an admin, I would definitely kind of not take that over the prettiness that it has. Now, that's just my take on that. And I feel like I might have diverted a little bit from the answer that she had. But I think it was, should you kind of like have it in relation to learning management system? I don't know, because I kind of fell into mine. And for some other people, I don't know if there's other people who want to raise their hand that's their experience too. Like, did you fall into yours the same way I did to mine? Because that's how it was for me. I didn't go out and seek to be an LMS administrator. I just kind of fell into it because the business necessitated it.
I'd love to hear, like, if Sam or Tom or Dan, if you guys have any an opinion on this. Just because I totally agree with Quetzal. I mean, you could probably be an instructional designer and not ever touch an LMS, I would think, but is that a good thing? It seems like you would want to at least have some experience with it. It would just add to your skill set, just to identify with the other people, to people that are supporting your content, like within an LMS. Let's see. Let's do a couple more from Robina here. How do you troubleshoot? This is a big one. How do you troubleshoot when you get stuck on building anything in the LMS? And maybe that's more of a platform specific question.
Okay. Excuse me. Sorry. I should have used my cough button. So how do I troubleshoot? I always try to look at, I look at it the same way that, I look at a lot of sorts of things. I used to run a game room when I worked at San Francisco State, and one of the things that I had implemented was, this was way back before Twitter. I think it was just like Friendster, maybe MySpace had just come in. But big thing there was forums. That was a huge thing, and I remember there was like these groups of high school kids. They had created, they had been on these forums where they kind of jumped between different arcades and kind of shared their experiences and whatnot. So I decided to jump in, and I created a thread on this forum, and they would, all of a sudden they would tell me, like, whenever I would go up to these kids actually in real life, say, hey, how are the games? What's going on? Oh, it's fine. Yeah, plays good. On these forums, they would trash all the arcades. Oh, sticks are broken. Oh, this button isn't working. This, and this. And I would get that feedback that I'm looking for. And then I would ask them like to be more specific. And it took a while, but then all of a sudden, once they saw that I was willing to kind of fix them, I would get more feedback back. They would say like, okay, downright isn't working or so forth. And these were people who were using it differently than I was intending, excuse me. So when I apply that to like troubleshooting and learning administration, it's the same sort of thing. Like, who are the users? Like, who is running into that problem? You don't know unless somebody actually tells you. So like having a connection with somebody on the other end is usually the first step. If somebody's saying a course isn't working, you need to find somebody who has like a similar sort of experience with them, not a power user, not an admin. Sometimes you can troubleshoot these things with that, but sometimes you actually need somebody who has that an account, a similar setup, and something like have them as your friend. Tell, can you open this link? If they say no, then you start like working backwards from that. Like, what's going on that's different? Like for me, I'm on a Mac. The majority of my company is on a PC. Might be as simple as that. Okay, you're on a PC. Can you try this here? Are you using Internet Explorer? Are you using Chrome? You know, from those, you start kind of working backwards, and then you kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, well, maybe it's how it's uploaded itself. Maybe somebody didn't hit a particular trigger. Maybe they did put the trigger, but the trigger for Storyline works in certain browsers, but not in others. So you just kind of like that's how I usually approach a lot of these sorts of items. And feel like that was a bit of a long-winded answer, though.
No, it sounds fairly typical too. Just sort of doing that, almost that detective work. That's that you know, to troubleshoot.
And it goes back to we were talking about before about like being an instructional designer, like having experience developing courses and so forth. Because I've been able to help other instructional designers who have had no experience with LMSs in the past, but they know their tool, they know what they're building in, and I can at least help them understand the next time they build for me. These are some of the things you need to keep in mind, because it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just that the system that we're playing with, we have to play by its rules.
Yeah. Here, I think answering this one would be pretty helpful for Rubina. Please explain SCORM, Tin Can, and XAPI. Broad general overview or comparison. What do you use most or prefer?
Oh, I'll probably have to have you come on here and explain that. I can't. I mean, I'll be honest. I am not somebody who couldn't explain those to the terms that I think would satisfy you.
Yeah.
What I can say is when you're using SCORM, you have like a limited sort of resources of what you can track. You know, I believe you can track things like, did they complete it? I'm trying to think of what are some of the other ones that are accessed, because the way I'm looking at it is in terms of our learning management system. Our learning management system is limited. Like it tracks, did they complete it? Yes, no. Maybe they can do how far along they are. And even that sometimes kind of falls short in like earlier versions of SCORM. I think 2004 at least tells you where they had landed. AICC, I think, is like, what is that? That's like an Air Force sort of one. I think that's what it stands for. I don't remember what the acronym is for that. And I don't recall what the difference of it is relative to SCORM. So sorry, I can't give you a good answer on that one. And the XAPI, as we had mentioned before, I believe it gives you more reportability in the spaces. Like if you had like a learning record store, you can kind of like talk to other sorts of elements outside of the course itself. But
yeah,
that's my understanding. Very limited.
Yeah, Tin Can and XAPI are the same thing, I believe. Tin Can evolved into XAPI. It's just the brand sort of changed. Yeah, so I'm kind of familiar with that piece of it, but other than that, that's all I got for that one. Any resources, useful resources or links that you go to for help when you're doing your work in the LMS?
Unfortunately, I don't have a direct answer for that, because usually the answer revolves around the knowledge base that the LMS that you're working with has. So whenever I have a problem with how my LMS operates, I have to use their knowledge base. And a lot of the times the knowledge base doesn't always have the answer I'm looking for. Sometimes I have to go through the help desk people that are there and kind of see how it operates. And I found in many cases that I had worked was like they hadn't updated their knowledge base. And sometimes I'm bringing new information to them. So I think that's relative to different sorts of learning management systems. I'm pretty sure there are some, opportunities. There are probably some forums out there where people are like all out about Cornerstone. They live and breathe it. They probably have a community about it. So it's very easy for them to reach out, just like with anything else. So if there are some of those that are available, I would encourage the community to share them. But in my experience, I've really kind of had like just following along with the knowledge base has probably been the most that I have used.
Yeah, it seems like it's just specific to each tool. That's, you're going to go to the help desk and pretty much jump into that knowledge base or talk directly to a CSM or something to be able to get any help. Okay, let's move back to some of the questions. We've only got like 15 minutes left here. Time is just flying by. Most rewarding part of your job?
My most rewarding part of the job is either when it works or when I get to the end of a particular task. And I say that very, see, Luis is laughing at me because he knows what I'm talking about. I say that very, very coded kind of because like a day like yesterday, our learning management system doesn't have the ability to, you have like all these courses kind of in the system there. And you would expect to kind of look at it the way you'd look at a filing cabinet. You put a bunch of stuff in the filing cabinet. Great. Everything is in the filing cabinet, but you have no sort of a filing system to know where everything is so you can grab it quickly. So you need to figure out the best way to do that. There is a folder structure to create categories in there, and that's fine, but it doesn't have a way, it's the way it's designed to grab like a whole bulk of them and throw them into that category. So I have to do this one at a time. Yesterday, I had to do 130 plus courses and move them into one folder, one at a time, by opening up each individual course and moving one little drop down. So that way it points to that, because it's the way it's designed. They also designed it so you can't select all of items. You have to select 20 because it has like this card system. It only shows so many on a page. But once you get through all of that, it's satisfying because then you can log in as another user and say like, okay, are they seeing an improved experience? Like before, because of the way everything was set up, they were seeing a whole bunch of courses that they couldn't access. But now, because of how I've categorized things, they can now search, and their search is cleaned up. Because all the stuff that looked like, oh, I want to take this. Oh, I can't take this. Those are gone because they're not supposed to look at that in the first place. It's a tedious task on your end. And if you have the time to clean it up, just like how you like clean up your room or sort things out so you can access it later on, it's tedious. It takes time. It's things that you wouldn't want to do. But when you get it done, it's very satisfying.
Wow. Yeah. So being able to actually complete something is just a win. And so
organization is huge. Like if you could take the time to understand how your system kind of organizes and, recognizing that whether you picked it and it's brand new or you've just kind of been dropped in there, if there are opportunities to organize it, try to take advantage of it, especially when you are like overloaded to try to get things done like that. Like the fact that I'm doing all this stuff helps me. Like, okay, I'm looking for a webinar of this particular topic that happened on this week.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to go on. I can use my categorization system to go for webinars to this particular topic to this particular week because I created that folder structure in place, but it all took time.
Yeah. Yeah. So there must be a good amount of planning on your part, like before you make any moves. Especially if when you're building out your library or organizing, you probably have to think ahead of yourself a few steps to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to be something that you're going to be able to work with in the future.
If I'm fortunate enough, a lot of times, especially like with this system that I was in, like I didn't have time afforded to it because I didn't know the system well enough. Yeah. So what I understood is like, I'm there to solve a problem, which is to get the course out, to make it accessible and have people use it. And then when I have the time, I realize like, oh, oh, the system can do it this way. Oh, I could try to do it this way. So I'll give you a great case. When we had used this LMS, we hadn't been using a lot for webinars. Usually it was just strictly e-learning. And a lot of the LMS experience I've had in the past was just strictly e-learning. You're just loading up e-learning courses and then people have to be able to access it. Since COVID had struck this entire world, everyone's working from home. E-learning courses, at least on my end, haven't been coming by nearly as much as webinars. Webinars have been huge. And I hadn't really had time to realize how I can kind of set these things up efficiently. So one example is we're doing one where we're training people on like Salesforce. And you're familiar with Salesforce there. Like imagine like a part of your company just doesn't know Salesforce because there was a merger and all of a sudden now they need to get trained on it. Well, you can't just train them all at once, at least not in the case that we had. We had to stagger them. Like we had to have them in different sorts of spaces. So I needed to figure out, like after the fact, I could look at it and like, okay, what does the reporting look like when I give it to somebody? Like, will it show up so that way people can see how it is? There's different sessions in it. Like, do I create separate courses? Like before, what I was doing is I was creating one course and one webinar session. And I was creating like all of these courses that only had one webinar session in it. But then I kind of, when I had time, I kind of took a step back, looked at it, and it's like, oh, well, I can actually create one course, have 30 sessions within the course itself.
Yeah. And
as long as I play by the LMS's rules, when I have to go back and add people and move stuff around, I only have to go to that one course. Mm-hmm. Because the rules that it said was, yes, you can do that, but we don't like it when you try to put the same person in two different sessions, even though in my case, I'm like, hey, that person might've been sick. Or that person wanted to know more. So they wanted the morning session and the afternoon session. So I have to figure out workarounds for that. And even things like, I'm trying to think, what was the other issue we had run into? Like instructors being in the same room. Somebody wanted to be in the morning session of one and the afternoon session in another. The system that I'm working with, it didn't like that a user was jumping between these sessions and still trying to track their reporting. It only liked it if you were associated with that one session, and that one session would only let you do just only 8:30 a.m. Monday through Friday. It wouldn't let you like bounce between that and another session and get successful tracking. Yeah. So those sorts of concessions I had to also take into account. But in the end, like now, if we were to do this, we would have an understanding of my whoever's doing the scheduling communicates with me. Hey, this person needs to switch sessions, but just for this one day. Yeah. So I have to go back into the session where they were only supposed to do mornings and manually mark them as complete. So I have to take some note taking and so forth. But as long as I understand all of those caveats, then I can make sure that that user is getting marked complete. They are using a link that's not going to block them because they should be in one session, but they're really in another session. And the instructors, the people who are spending all day in there, they're not getting blocked either because their experiences hinder upon me providing the best experience possible. If they are getting locked out constantly, if they're not being able to engage it, like they're kind of soured about the LMS. And then they're like, oh, can I just get the backdoor link? And they will give that to their directs and say, you know what, just use the backdoor link, you'll get in faster. Yes, you will get in faster, but now we can't track you. And especially if you work in a company that would potentially would face litigation from time to time, somebody leaves and they say, I wasn't properly trained on X or so forth, you have to show receipts. And if they use that back door, how are you going to show receipts?
Yeah. Hey, are there any other instructional designers on your team?
There is at least one, yes.
Okay. Because, when I'm listening to you, this stuff, like I think that I would probably excel as an LMS admin because I think in the same way, right? But this sounds so unglamorous. I would think to an instructional designer, like it has nothing to do with like anything that you went to school for.
I would treat this the same way I treat when people ask about instructional design. It's like, if you want to use a football metaphor, we're the offensive line. Yeah. You only notice the offensive line when they break down, when the quarterback gets sacked. If they do their job, you really don't care. Yeah, if the LMS is doing its job, you really don't care. But when
What
but
you're
when the
talk-
LMS doesn't hang up, that you noticed, you're going to give those negative reviews.
because you were doing like mission critical stuff. You really are. And but it's not, we don't have this conversation at all really on TLDC about the importance of the LMS admin. And this is your skill set is critical for a team to succeed. So it really is interesting to me, just sort of as we're going through this, that we've never really spoken. We rarely ever talk about this stuff, at all. So, no, it's very, very cool. Now we only have a few minutes left. Let me get into more specifics. What are the LMSs that you've used in the past, or
okay, I've used like I said, I don't remember what it was at Cisco. Their online testing, I don't know if that counts, but they used an LCMS, but I'd use it mostly as it's LMS. I had used SumTotal. I don't know what their name was before that. I've used that. I used
to know it. It was, it had another
Cornerstone. I know that Cornerstone seems to be one of those top ones out there, kind of like a Starbucks coffee of LMSs. And Docebo. So I think I'm trying to think if there's any others. I can't say Moodle because I've used Moodle, but not in the same capacity as an LMS admin. So I would love to say that I can't.
Yeah. Okay. So, and currently you are on Docebo.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what do you like about it?
Yeah. So Docebo, like you pronounce it like Docido. I mean, you see it like Docebo, but it's really, they're Italian.
Yeah. I always called it
they're
Docebo.
Italian, so it's Docebo.
Yeah.
So what I like about it relative to other LMSs that I've worked at is that it's pretty. It's pretty. Like, and from a user side, that means a lot. Like if you look at a fancy microphone or a fancy guitar or so forth, and you have no experience with it, you just know how it feels to you, like visually. It feels great. Visually, it hits the spot. Like if you look at it relative to like if you're using a Cornerstone that doesn't have like a skin on it, like it's true form of Cornerstone right there, it looks very Spartan in comparison. Same I could say with when I was using SumTotal and some of these other ones. So the first time I had ever seen it, it's visually it's pretty. It's really pretty. If how it's being used is within its boundaries, it's a great tool. And I'm pretty sure there are people out there that use it within the boundaries that the company intended. And for them, they probably have a positive experience with it.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me, one time I got a guitar in a trade, probably the most beautiful guitar, or maybe the second most beautiful guitar I've ever owned. I brought it to a really good luthier to do some work on it. And he's like, this guitar was made by a cabinet maker. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, play it. This was made by a cabinet maker, not a guitar maker. And I'm like, okay, you're probably right.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, yeah.
So, and my complaints is just relative to the learning management systems that I've worked in the past. And people who've bounced around different companies and have done this know what I'm talking about. Like if you've worked with the learning management system in the case of like Cornerstone, I mean, the interface is kind of like the reporting is great. They have like you can move things around. Like sometimes it takes some getting used to because you don't get the reporting you're looking for because you're not asking the right questions. You have to treat it like a 6-year-old. Like you have to tell it specifically, very specific what you want, and it gives you the answer. It can't interpret what you're trying to ask for. But if you put it in its right order, as far as data or so forth, you can get a lot of data out of it. You can get whatever it provides, it will give it to you. It's like, sure, we have all this data. We will give it to you. You just need to ask the right question. And I love that about them. Like it's the way that you can kind of do it. With a company like this, they're reporting, they haven't really caught up with a lot of those. Like it looks like they're kind of trying, like they have in their system, they have a reports and a new reports. And in their old reporting system, like you can't track a webinar session, but in their new reporting system, you can, but you could only get updated data either within 24 hours or when you press a button and you only get one refresh a day, kind of like baseball, you only get one challenge. So little things like that. So if you come from one space where you really want, like you're used to how certain things work, and then you go into another system, and you're like, oh, how come I can't do this? Like it should do this. Like it should have like a basic sort of functionality that you're trying to achieve, and it doesn't. You kind of look at it differently. And that's something that's kind of unique to an LMS admin, because you know what it should do. To a learner, like it's whatever you give them. Like they're not going to spend time there. They just give them a link. They want the course. They don't really care. To a manager, they care when they ask you a question and you have to tell them, I can't give you that, but I can give you this, because you're kind of working within the limitations of whatever LMS you have.
So let's get more specific about what you dislike about Docebo now. And I sort of want to take it from the point of like the perspective of if you wanted to help them improve their product, what are the things that like that irk you, and it's like, please fix this, make my life a little easier, Docebo people?
Learning experience design team. Like if you have a learning experience design team, you got to get them front and center with the navigation, with how not just how the administrator uses it, but how the learner kind of uses it. And that involves, the learning experience team will be front and center with talking to the people that actually use it. Like that's their job. Like if they are worth their salt in what they do, they will get in front of it and they will work directly with the people that are using it the most. And they seek out the criticisms, and they will explain it in such a way to the developer. It's like, okay, but have you thought about this sort of way of how somebody might be using it? And I think that's probably something that would go with a lot of things. Like anyone who's ever worked with the user experience design team, they will kind of open your eyes to things that you wouldn't necessarily see as designing it. Like my favorite book, even from my days at Cisco, that I would always give to a new hire or someone, is Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. And the reason why I love that book is because when you look at a web page and you see how everything is kind of designed, it's designed from the perspective of somebody who designed it. Like if you imagine the old days of web pages where it was just like bleh all over the screen and whatnot, a designer would say, okay, well, I want people to go in, where's my camera? There it is. I want people to go in a direct line like this. They want to read this way, and then I expect them to go up to the next way and read this way, and then I want to go up here and read this way, just like you're reading a book or something of that nature. But that's not how people look at web pages. People go onto there and they bounce around. They kind of go this way, like their eyes go all over the place because they're seeking different things. And you want your interface to be able to help them. Like you want that 2 clicks in 10 seconds sort of thing. Like if I'm looking for something, I know that there's a search bar or there's tabs or there's something like accessible that hits my needs. So that way I don't spend all my time doing this, because I'm doing this because I can't find what I'm looking for. And I would like learning management systems to kind of really take that more into account when they're developing their systems.
Yeah. So Docebo is a little UX challenge. Is that basically it?
That's my experience. I mean, on the other end, like ones like Cornerstone, I haven't used it recently, probably can use a benefit of like having a better setup on the front end, like visually, like its visual presentation could be better, but I haven't used it recently. So if some people are saying that it's better, they have some custom skins or so forth, just let me know.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up since we've done our hour, but I want to say this is a rare conversation, I think, to take this stuff on in L&D in our space to actually have like real conversations about LMSs. And I think that it's important to have it. Like I was saying earlier, it's not very glamorous to talk about it. I doubt that a ton of people are going to want to like hear what people have to say about LMSs, because it's, I don't know, it's just something that's overlooked. But the job that you do, and that like Sam does and Tom does, and it's super important. And I'm excited to just continue the conversation and have this series. And if we only get 10 people watching these, it's still important.
Do you have a link to the thread that was originally starting this in Slack that you can kind of paste in order to continue the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do. There are folks in there like, like I was saying, Randy is going to talk about Blackboard and a couple other people. Tom, we're going to have on. I've got to just message everybody, but yeah, this is going to be a regular thing because I think it's just important to have out there. And it sort of speaks to me too, because I'm sort of one of those resource people that like just finds solutions, finds answers. And so it's really intriguing to me. The people that are people that are doing the LMS admin work, just sort of that skill set is probably not I don't know, people probably don't honor it as much as they should, so maybe we can kind of bring that more to light.
I mean, I don't think it requires like a medal or any sort of commendations or whatnot, but it is a necessary function. It's something that I think, if you really want to kind of ensure that your learners are really getting the best experiences out of the courses that you develop, then it's important to understand how they're looking at it after it leaves your hands.
Yeah.
And people who do LMS administration have an understanding because that's the space that they operate in.
Right. And like you were saying earlier, you're just getting slammed with webinar content. This stuff has to be managed. And so it's not like that type of thing is going to slow down. It's going to become even more important. And it's all about just all this content that's floating out there. Quetzal, thank you so much for doing this today. Happy Friday to you. Hope you're going to have a nice long weekend chilling out here. AC environment there in Phoenix. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Like one of these days I got to get back to Phoenix and we can go get barbecue again. That was a lot of fun that night. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate you being here. Next week, Kara North is going to be doing Confessions of an ID Hiring Manager. I think it was on Wednesday. Might have something on Friday as well, like the next in this LMS series. And we'll just keep the conversation going. All right. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Say their name, folks.